I'm doing well. I have my coffee, so if there's slurping sounds, I apologize to people with mesothelioma. That's not what it is. Oh no. Well, we're off to a great start.
Yeah,
I've been watching a lot of TV, and a lot of mesothelioma commercials are coming on for whatever reason.
oh man. Yeah, because we've been talking about doing this for a while.
Yeah.
And we were trying to wrap our heads around a concept or just where we want to go. And then I was just like, what is comics? And I feel like that is broad enough for us to find our little niche or hole wherever we want to
What
hide.
comics, Matt? What comics?
What
What
comics?
comics? Why comics?
Why? I know. Yeah, why
How
comics is.
comics, Matt?
Oh man, and
That's my one joke that I've written in the shower this morning.
Oh really?
So now everything's off the dome.
So in disc golf, somebody said, "Why are trees?" Because they hit trees all the time, and I was like, "Why are comics?" And I was like, so I didn't even come up with what is comics. I mean,
that's fine.
So
that's good.
And for the people that are joining us, I'm like a Gen Xer, and you're kind of where I don't even know what you. I don't worry about people, younger than me.
I'm a millennial.
Millennial.
Yeah, that's what they call us.
Oh yeah, that was the thing. So I was trying to think of the first cartoon that I remember watching as a kid, and I remember the Electric Company having Spider-Man on. I remember that, so it's like one of the first big core memories, and I remember the Godzilla cartoon as well, because before comic books, before G.I. Joe and Transformers, I was a Godzilla baby. I loved that beyond all belief as a kid.
Is that the Hanna-Barbera Godzilla?
Yeah, it was the but before that, it was the the Japanese show movies that would be on Sunday afternoon. Be like, oh look, what's Sunday afternoon? I'm watching. There was no people didn't worry about screen time, or my parents didn't worry about screen time for me. I was just I had a TV in my room as a kid, and I was just going through my 4 channels through antenna. So what is the first cartoon that you remember?
I watched the Flintstones. So this is where we differ. This is where I become older than you in 2 seconds.
Yeah, but you weren't alive for the Flintstones.
No, but they were on reruns when I was a kid, and so I would wake up with my dad and on Cartoon Network early in the morning. I guess for when dads were going to work, they would play old Hanna-Barbera cartoons. So I grew up watching the Flintstones, Jetsons, Top Cat, all, Space Ghost, all of that stuff was on.
Oh yeah, because I do remember
early in the morning on Cartoon Network in the 90s.
Okay, because there was the other station called Boomerang.
Boomerang came later, so it was Boomerang. Boomerang became its own channel later, but it was at that point in time when Boomerang was a thing. Boomerang came on in the morning before school, and then Adult Swim, and so there was Boomerang, Cartoon Network,
okay,
and then there was the Cartoon block, which was all the new age Hanna-Barbera stuff, and then it went to Toonami, which was all the anime stuff, and then it was Adult Swim after that. That was so the Cartoon Network actually had programming that was different throughout. Yeah, that stuff shaped my childhood.
Okay.
That programming changed everything.
It is funny because my kids have Flintstone vitamins in the morning,
mm-hmm.
and they're Tessa's I got the short guy. Who is that again? And I'm like, that's Barney. That's Barney. And I'm explaining through Flintstone vitamins the Flintstones, and we've Margot got them some DVDs for road trips, and they got some later Flintstone stuff when Pebbles and Bam Bam are getting married, and it's really bad. It's so bad. I really wish I could find them some like older stuff where it's like, the 60s version of the Flintstones, because I feel like that was a lot better and stuff.
Yeah, when it's more honeymooners and less, I don't know.
Because
Bunch.
I'm listening to it in my ear, and I'm like, I'm driving, and I'm like, why does anybody ever listen to Fred at all? Like,
get them a Man Called Flintstone. That's, I think, single-handedly one of the best episodes. I guess it was like a double episode, so it's 40 minutes. But A Man Called Flintstone is great. Twists and turns, and I mean, it's a spy. It's a spy show.
No, I think it's the one where he's like, the spy looks like Fred.
Yes.
Okay, and they're like jumping around from like Paris to other places.
Yeah.
I've listened to it.
A Man Called Flintstone is so fun. It's so good.
Okay, we're 6 minutes into our comic book podcast, and we haven't talked about comic books at all.
But we've talked about the building blocks of Jamie
what?
Jones. That's also important.
Yeah, because for me, I remember, like, I went to like summer camp, and like one of my friends, it was a combination of, I went to summer camp, and one of my friends was into comic books, and then we went into my grandfather's basement and like dug around for some of his old comic books, or my dad's from like the 60s. So like I got some like old Thor, and then like my buddy was like into comic books. And at that time I was into like G.I. Joe and Transformers. So G.I. Joe Special Missions #1 was out, and I was like, oh, I'll grab this one, and that will be my introduction to comic books collecting. And then I like tried to read G.I. Joe, but like as a kid, the cartoon was like nice and like G-rated and everything, and then the comic book was like, I was like, what is going on with these guys? Like, it was just, I don't know. And then I had like fell into Spider-Man, and Spider-Man kind of just hit where it wanted to be, and that's, and then they introduced Tim Drake as Robin, so that was like a good jumping on point as well. It was the late '80s was interesting time for comics for me, because it was right before they started, like, before they killed Superman and Batman and made
before the cash grab of like, we have to sell these things now.
Yeah,
it seems to me, and I in my very, I guess, limited knowledge of comic books, that time period right before the implosion or the bubble burst, where comics aren't really right. You get Watchmen, Dark Knight, those come out in '86. TMNT comes out in '86, right around that time period. You've got a bunch of stuff that's coming out that are now elevating the medium, not even like socially, not even like in the actual industry, not elevating. It was, but socially, outside of the people reading comics, were like, oh, comic books, they're for adults now. That was an Alan Moore impression. But so you get a bunch of things that people were doing things that were interesting, G.I. Joe, that still had some kind of like maturity running through it, but it was still like an accessible maturity for children, and not just like, this is now mature. Comics are now mature. And then you get to the '90s, which is like that flash in the pan. Everyone's drawing as cool as they possibly can.
yes.
And then you go to the implosion of comic books, and that in lies where we are now.
I mean, we skipped a few steps. We definitely skipped a few steps on the implosion, and then.
Listen, we've been talking about comic books dying since comic books became a thing. That's just an industry standard. At this point, everyone
Oh,
you talk to in comic that works in comics has had a conversation about like comic books are dying, and then uh, so one of my favorite things to do is uh, read interviews with people. And there's a great book, Sparring with Gil Kane, that Fantagraphics put out, and it's just a bunch of interviews with Gil Kane. That's the majority of the conversations, and this is happening in the 70s. Comic books are dying. That's and they're like, how do we fix comics? And they've been having that conversation since the 70s, since probably before that.
so where are you on the doom and gloom scale?
Comic books are dying. Comic books have always been dying. Comic books will be a thing forever. That's my thought on the doom and gloom thing. Like we can dwell on the doom and gloom side of it, or we can just make comics.
Make comics.
I think the
Yeah.
medium will prevail. I don't think pictures and words simultaneously will ever fade, because it's easier to in lazy times. It's easier to read pictures. You get just as much information. You don't have to read words. Great.
All right, and where are we? How close are we to the 100th anniversary of comics? Are we? Did we
Uh,
pass it?
I mean, what are we talking about? We've passed that a long time ago. Comic books,
Yeah.
or comics as an idea.
Oh, yeah. Well, I know comics as an idea has been around more than 100 years.
We've passed 100 years a while ago.
Yeah. So we're like right around like 100 years of like Action Comics #1, right?
I think we just hit like was last year 75 of Action.
Yeah.
Superman's 75th birthday.
Right.
But superheroes don't really exist until Action Comics. That's kind of
Yeah.
that's the crux of it all.
I mean, so we've been doing this for a while. We've been making comic books for a while. Not us personally, but like the world has been making comic books for a while. And it's interesting to see how the industry is like moving now. I think I mean, I had a comic book store for 5 years, and it was very tough to keep it afloat because like new comic books are kind of brutal with how it works. And now like I know distribution's even more fractured and stuff. But now like you and I have been self-funding comic books, which is like a whole nother area of comic books, and that market doesn't even like count towards like I guess the direct market and stuff. So it's all over the place right now. It's just chaos.
Yeah, it's been all over the place for years. Like even you ran a comic shop in what the
2006 to
2006. Yeah.
yeah.
So you ran a comic shop in 2006. That's around when I started reading comics. I think I was 17 when I read Sandman, Fables, and The Goon. Those were the three comics that the shop recommended me. I had no desire to read anything superheroes. My brother was reading X-Men, and he was really into X-Men stuff. I had no desire for superheroes, which I didn't realize is what I would care about now that I create comics. Like I don't care about superheroes that much anymore. But unless unless DC wants me to write Legion of Superheroes, I'll go full hog, full bore, crazy nerd on that. But for the most part, didn't care about superheroes. Read Sandman, read Fables, and read The Goon, and I was like, oh, this is like comics are different. Um, but self-publishing was still a thing back then too. Like that, it was people were making self-published comics. Distribution was a little easier, I think, for self-publishing. Um, Maybe not in the early 2000s, but before that, right? Like you were able to find, because there were smaller distribution channels, you were able to find a distributor who would sell your stuff, and that's something better than than it is now. I mean, it's hard as a self-publisher to get into Diamond, or like just the upfront cost. The cost of getting into Diamond is can be cost prohibitive. But now we have things that can completely negate that. I mean, Michel Fife has been self-publishing Copra for the last, I don't know, decade. I think he hit 10 years. And that's insane to me. Like that's a long time to self-publish a comic that he's for almost the entire run. There was a brief stint where he did 6 issues at Image, but he stopped publishing it at Image and went back to distributing it himself. That's all run through his Etsy store. That was his business. His business model is, I'm going to take Etsy, like I'm going to make a comic and put it out through Etsy, and that I find really interesting. And I think there's more of that in comics than we really, when we talk about comics, when journalism and when these news outlets talk about comics, we're only ever talking about Marvel and DC, and not about the strong presence of self-publishing. That's always been a thing. Bone was originally self-published, right? I think the big phone book version of Bone, that's not in color, that's all just black and white, that's still put out by Cartoon Books. That's not put out by Scholastic. Jeff Smith, I guess, made the deal of a century where he could print the massive tome of Bone through his own publishing company. So that's like, does he have distribution in Barnes and Noble? Does he have large distribution? Yeah, but he's technically still self-publishing that, right? That's the other thing. Is like, and Cerebus is still self-published, right? They're redoing all of that stuff. Cerebus is big self-published book. Yeah, I think self-publishing now is easier than ever. Some of the most interesting books that I've read in the last 5 years have been self-published. Self-publishing is, we're lucky that comics doesn't have the taboo that it used to, like that self-publishing has in the prose world, and that's good. But like, The Martian kind of changed that idea too. The Martian, that was made a movie, with the hit movie with Matt Damon.
That
The Martian.
That was a
self-published book. Yeah, he put it out through Amazon and was like editing it during its, like, he put it out and wrote it in chapters, and it was all just an Amazon publishing thing. It was like through Kindle.
That's crazy.
He was just a guy making a book that Matt Damon wanted to make as a movie.
That's still it's still one of my favorite movies too, like of recent years. Like, I came out of that movie like motivated, and like, like it's a motivating. Read it if you haven't, or watch the movie. But like,
which I haven't. I just know that it was self-published.
Yeah. Okay. So for me, like, I'm like a Marvel DC nerd that has been slowly moving over to the self-published area. I remember, because like when I had the store, like I was just like superheroes and like comic books, and then like I wish I knew a lot more about the comic book industry than I did before I opened my store, but like, graphic novels were, really starting to boom at that point in time, and people, just binging whole series. I don't even think binging was a word at that point in time, or it was a word, but it wasn't. Binging was a negative word.
It was a negative word.
It was a negative word.
You didn't want to binge things.
Yeah, and we had, like, in Chicago, we had Quimby's as the independent bookstore / comic book store, and so if you were doing like self-published stuff, you would be going there. I do remember people coming into my store and being like, "Hey, will you put my stuff on the shelf and stuff?" And we had a small indie section that kind of grew, but it was always tough because our store was small, and you had limited number of space, and
Right.
and Marvel and DC kept printing more and more issues of stuff. So like they were doing it. It's very interesting to see Marvel and DC try to push out the indie books, because they're like, we're gonna produce 40 titles this month.
History, that's been a thing since the beginning of Marvel and DC, right?
Yeah.
so DC, when Marvel started to become a thing, had market share or just like even just like placement on the newsstand. And so I think Marvel was able to put out like 6 or 7 books a month. I think that was kind of what what it ended up being. DC was just like, we're a massive company. We've been publishing comics for 20 years longer than you. We can do whatever we want. And Marvel came in, and that's why I believe like it's amazing that Jack Kirby got as much work it's done as he did. But he does Thor, he does Fantastic Four. He does whatever Jack Kirby was doing at the time, it was just astronomical. But he's still like, we look at it and go, that guy's drawing several books a month, and he was, and that's incredible. But at the same time, there were only 6 books that Marvel was putting out, and so
right,
like that's the crazy thing too. So this idea of like Marvel and DC trying to push out company like other publishing companies has been a thing since forever, since the beginning. I guess this is really what is comics. Comics is a cyclical thing that we continue to talk about the same problems over and over and over again, hoping that something's going to change, and nothing does. So we just continue to have the same conversations for decades.
Yeah, but I feel like things have changed. I mean, like,
things have shifted. I don't know if things have changed.
Okay.
Marvel and DC still want all of the market share, which is every business everywhere.
Yes. So I had the comic book store, and as soon as I opened the comic book store, I was like, oh man, I probably need this money, but I bought $100 worth of Marvel stock because Marvel wasn't owned by Disney at that point in time. And I was like, oh man, if I'm going to be in it, I'm going to be in it. And like, I bought some Marvel stock, and then Disney bought them, and then, I got my money. They're like, oh, you got like a quarter of a Disney share at that point in time for the $100.
Yeah.
But yeah, there's definitely been when you have the 2 big corporations, like massive corporations, Disney and Warner Brothers, or whatever you call Warner Brothers these days. I don't even know what they're, because it's Warner
Time
Brothers.
Warner.
I
think Time Warner?
I don't know. I think Warner Brothers is this chaos. But yeah, if it's 2 massive corporations, and then you have like you and me and thousands of other people like you and me, like, hey, I'm going to publish my comic book, and I'm gonna hustle, and I'm gonna go to these shows, and I'm gonna do my thing, and blah blah. And just try to find my little niche in the bigger niche and stuff. But it's I don't know. I think
the thing is, like, you can't. I think as a self publisher, as a independent artist making stuff, you're building a community more than you are building a product. And I have started to think about this more and more. I don't think people buy my comic to necessarily because they're like diehard Baboon fans, right? I don't think people buy my comic because they're diehard anything that I make. I think people buy my comics because they like me and they want to support me. And maybe they like the stories that I'm doing, and that's super fun. But that's not why. Like the cult of personality around making comics is almost more important than the comics that you're making. I mean, like, for sustainability, there's definitely like flash in the pan. I'm gonna do. This is my. Nobody take this idea if you're watching this, because this is my. I need to make money comic. It's called Private Dick Puncher. It is a cash grab that maybe one day I'll do, but I make wholesome comics, and I can't do Private Dick Puncher. He's a private eye that punches penises. There you go.
Oh man,
it's great. I mean, I'll make money.
So since we're talking about all the things we've been talking about for before a podcast, I'm sure there was people sending letters back and forth to each other about the issues of the comic book industry. Like, do you think the industry is broken?
I don't know if it's broken. I don't know if it's is it the best the industry can be? No. But is it broken? I think there's just things that we don't. I mean, this is the same thing. Probably with all industries. There's people on the ground who are actually making stuff that understand. Like, hey, if we just did something, if we skewed a little bit one way, this whole industry would work better. But up top, they're looking at numbers and not necessarily. Again, businesses are not people. Businesses are businesses. And so they're looking at bottom line and numbers more than an individual person. I just spent the last month shipping books, like printing off labels, putting them in packages, going to the post office, doing all that stuff. I just spent the last month doing that. That's a lot of sweat equity just to put something out. That doesn't even consider marketing. I think that's really where let me tangentially answer your question. The problem with comics is that we don't know how to market comics. Nobody does. And I don't think we've known how to market comics since the beginning of comics. I think the best marketing comics has ever had was Hey Kids Comics, and that was on Spinner Rex. That's the best marketing we've ever done. That's bad marketing. But that was also marketing when spinner racks were everywhere. When you had newsstand distribution, that's the best thing. That was a thing. But I don't think comics have found a way to break through the wider circle of comics. Comics talks about comics to other people who are reading comics. That's like as an industry. The echo chamber of comics is high. If you look at Twitter, if you look at X, if you look at Instagram and all those things, the people that you're reaching are not new people. They're people who are interested in the thing that you're doing. And while that's good for building up your own kind of community, what it doesn't do is reach a wider audience. We were having this conversation. I mentioned to you, I was like, I hang out with people who don't work in comics. I don't want to talk about comics most of the time. When I go out, when I go to the bar, the last conversation I want to have is comics. I've been working all day. I've been looking at comics all day. I don't want to talk about comics. So I have kind of curated this friend group that none of us talk about comics. We talk about our lives. We're very involved in each other's lives, which is a whole separate problem. But but I know more about these people, and what I find interesting is people don't know the names of directors, like film directors. They don't know the names of actors. They don't know, like, that blows my mind as a guy who, like, I love Edgar Wright. I'll trust an Edgar Wright movie. I'll go see a movie because Edgar Wright directs it. Great. Other people don't know who Martin Scorsese is. That blows my mind. That blows my mind. Martin Scorsese's granddaughter has a TikTok, and people were like, who's this old guy in all of your TikToks? And I'm like, what? Are you kidding me? It's Martin Scorsese. That's a thing. That's a thing that we're dealing with now. And I think we've always dealt with, but people don't know. I feel like every time you do an interview with somebody who's not in comics, you have the same conversation about how did you get into this industry? How long have you, like, how the question I got when I was an actor that we always were like, this is the worst question you can ask an actor is, how do you remember all those lines? And it's like, well, no, it's my job. It's my job to remember these lines. How do you draw that picture? Well, it's my job to draw this picture. That's the kind of thing that when you have people who don't know anything about art making, blanket statement art, like capital A art making, people don't know anything about it. You don't know anything. People don't know how to interact. And you, as a person who, as a quote unquote artist, have to now answer the same questions over and over again. And that's why you see actors get bored when they're answering questions. It's because how many times do they have to answer the same question? But those people are trying to, the journalists are trying to reach a broader audience than the niche guys. That's why Letterboxd having a TikTok and going up to actors and going, "What's your 4 favorite films?" is a good thing, because it gets you more, like, every actor is interested in talking about that. They want to talk about their favorite movies more than they want to talk about themselves, maybe. But it's like one of the only journalism sites that is going through and really giving somebody a time to talk about what they love and also be informative to a broader audience. Because if they're mentioning movies that people have never heard, maybe they will go and they figured it out. Letterboxd, TikTok figured it out.
Right, so, but you're on TikTok. Whenever I've gone on TikTok, it's just been white trash theater. So I don't ever see anything remotely informative at all on TikTok. But that's just a generational thing, because you probably figured out the app way sooner.
I don't know anything. I don't know it at all. The last TikTok I made, I was smelling my own book. That was I went, oh, this is book reviews with Jamie Jones. One of my favorite things is book smells. Maybe you like book smells. And I just smelled my own book. I was like, I have a new book out.
That was one of my questions when I talked to people. I was like, how did it feel to hold the first comic book that you published? Like, what was the first book you published, and how did it feel to hold?
First book I printed, I did with Trace Dean, and we did Dodger, which was a mini comic. It was a tech robot, giant mech suit robot Western book. And that was cool. I don't know. The first time I held a book and I was like, oh, this is cool. This is impressive. Was the first Baboon book. When I got the first Baboon book, I went, oh, I've done it. Like, I personally, it was the first book that I was talking to the printer about, really made it, and it worked. But books are cool. I need to celebrate making a book more than I do, because I found even the second book just came out, right? The second big Baboon book just came out. It looks really good. I'm really happy with it. Have I had any time to give myself kudos for making something? No. So the excitement's almost gone.
I wonder if that's a creator thing, because my dad's a musician, and he will create something, and then as soon as he puts it out, he just starts working on the next project. It's just, I wonder if that's a creator mind, where you're just okay, I did this, now it's time to move on to the next thing.
That's certainly what it is. I know a lot of people who don't like to even look back at their old work. I have no problem with that. But yeah, I think there's definitely creator mindset is something comes out. I don't know. I try not to let myself get sidetracked by the newness of something. It's oh, this just came out. Let me celebrate, and I did a book. It's okay, this is done. Let's go to the next thing. Let's make something. But that's also poor business on my part, because I should like promote the crap out of that book. I should talk about that book a lot more than I have. Because it came out, it's 94 pages. It's a hardcover book. It's a nice looking book, but I haven't talked about it a lot, especially in any manner that is like, my friends know all about it, but that's about it.
It's the bit. I mean, the business. I mean, that's part of the business of comics or self-publishing comics. Is that like? I mean, did you? I can't remember. Did you crowdfunder issue the second? Okay, so
yeah.
So you've already like sold that book,
Mm-hmm.
and so now you've shipped it out, and like, I guess in the business world, like there should be like round 2 of selling, but for some reason, I have it too. It's like, okay, I kickstarted this book, I shipped them all out. Let's get the next book out and start kickstarting and crowdfunding that one, and then you kind of just keep moving from there. Like I don't know. Part of me has it to where it's like, oh, I'll offer these previous books in my Kickstarter or crowdfunder and go from there, or I'll use these for shows or whatever. Like, but yeah, there's definitely should be like a secondary market of like, maybe, this could be a Kickstarter tip, is like the people you send books to Kickstarter, ask them for like reviews, and then use those reviews to help you sell like through Etsy or something like that. I don't know.
Yeah.
If you,
that's the thing about self-publishing that's very difficult now. It's you want to continually put something out, but you also can't get sidetracked by when you are shipping your own book, when you do not have like a distributor, finding ways to sell your book, to get it in shops, to basically be your own distributor, right? You have to reach out to comic shops. The majority of your job is not making comics, and that's like I say, 80% of my job is not drawing comics.
No.
20. I get to draw 20% of the time. Writing and drawing is 20% of my time. Everything else is making sure I send the right books to people. Make it, that's the entirety of self-publishing, which is fine. I very much enjoy that side of it too, and I think maybe that's one of the reasons, not to get too personal about it, but I don't necessarily consider myself an artist. I run a business that sells comic books that I just so happen to make. That's the,
Well, we still got to work on your sales pitch. Like that's, you're like, I'm in a business. This is what I do. Like, no, man, this is my passion. This is what I love. Like, blah blah blah. Like, you talked about this with your panel presence, and you were too business.
Well, people ask questions and I want to give them the answer that I would want as a person, and I think that's really what it comes down. Like, I'm not a good panelist because I don't want to talk about the flowery side of stuff.
Yes, but I'm going to try to break the mold of like the business Jamie, and try to talk to artist creator Jamie. And it just came to me a little bit ago that I didn't realize it, but I saw it through like Instagram reel or something like that. But they were talking about like the horizon line in comic books, and that all the heads, big or small, had to be along the horizon line to make it kind of like look proper to a person. And I was like, oh man, that kind of like opened a door in my mind of making comic books, or how people set up a panel and how people, create comic books. And I was like, what's a piece of knowledge that we can give people today that'll be like, oh, that opened my mind a little bit more to like panel layout or comics?
Oh, I don't know. There's so much. There's just one thing. Just one
One
thing.
thing. We got to give the audience. We have to enlighten. Part of this thing is enlightening the audience. We have to give them at least one thing. One thing.
Man, this is so. Comic books are not. Comic books aren't movies. You don't have to animate everything. I guess that's the main, like that will be my my big thing. If you look at like an old Jack Kirby Captain America book,
right,
and it's like that big 4 panels, he's not he's not drawing. So if Cap is punching Red Skull, he's punching up, and then the next panel is a complete. It's like I fall into this because I like. I'm a big fan of like Frank Miller Daredevil fight scenes and Will Eisner spirit stuff, because there's a fight scene stuff, and this doesn't just go for fight scenes, but it's really easy to talk about for fight scenes. If you throw a punch with your right hand, you're not going to throw another punch with your right hand, right? It's going to be like punch, duck, you're choreographing a fight scene. If you look at like John Wick, everything's fluid, everything's going around. You don't have to do that in comics. You can just go static image, static image, static image, static image. And if the static image is engaging, that's a better comic than an animated. If somebody's eating a bowl of cereal, they don't need to go, you don't need to show a panel of the spoon going in, and you don't need to show a panel of the spoon going to the mouth and then going back in. You also don't need the in-between of the spoon carrying the cereal. Like that's not necessary. And that has, I think, been a big thing in comics, especially superhero comics recently, with the Bendis talking head stuff, as they really like decompress the storytelling so much that you're like, what? Like, I'm just watching a guy eat cereal for 3 pages? That's what I'm doing? That is not entertaining to me.
This is on my list, and you kind of. I love when I make a list and people talk, and then I can just go to the next point on my list. Is this single issue dead?
No, I don't think so. I think the single issue is not as important as it used to be. And I think that's why you see a decline in single issue sales, because now everything is getting a collection, right? We're building to the collection.
Right.
In the before times, before trade paperbacks and collections were a thing all the time.
Let's write this down. Before times. What date do we think the before times is? Because I'm gonna figure this out one of these days.
Well, before times before
2000.
That's definite. When did Spider-Man come out?
The movie?
The first one, the Sam Raimi Spider-Man.
2002, I think.
I think that's the before times.
Okay,
before Spider-Man, because that really changed a lot.
Before Bendis? Should it be before Bendis? The before times?
I think Bendis. I mean, that is all before Bendis. Now, I feel like now I'm saying things and people are going to be like, JB Jones hates Brian Michael Bendis, and I don't. I think Bendis is great. but he did have a nickname at my comic shop that I went to, and they called him the Bendosaurus, because he just kind of trampled over whatever he did whatever he wanted to do. He just trampled over everything. And I loved that name. But the before times, before trades were ubiquitous with everything, before everything got a collection, the individual comic book sold that story, right? The individual comic was what you were reading. And then everything became collected into trades, and it's a better reading experience when issue 1 flows into issue 2, flows into issue 3 when it is collected, than it is like every issue. Try reading. I've got a collection of Daredevil. I got the first big epic collection of Daredevil. Every issue explains who Daredevil is.
Right.
Every single issue, and you're like, well, I don't have to read that part because I know who Daredevil is. And we changed that because now we're writing for this. So is the single issue dead? No. Do I think we need to write better single issues? Yes. Because I think single issue, like there are certain people who do it really well. Hickman, I think, writes a great single issue. I think Rick Remender writes a great single issue. Because those guys are constructing like minor stories in an issue. They're not just constructing a trade. They're going, okay, this is the overall arc for the trade, the 6-issue arc. This is every 2 issues we have an arc. Every single issue we have an arc, right? There's arcs on arcs on arcs on arcs. And that's what will save the comic book industry. better writing.
You know what's funny is because like that was one of Stan Lee's staples, is to have like the origin of a character in the early issues all the time so that anybody could pick up an issue and understand it. And so that's now what I hate about movies, is that they're like, oh, we're going to do a Batman movie, and there's always like, we have to give a little 5 minutes of doing his origin again. Like, I don't need a Batman origin again in a movie. I just need you to do a Batman movie.
Yeah.
So we're repeating some of the things that we did in comic books now in comic book movies.
You say this, but it is one of the biggest critiques I get for the Baboon, which is often, this doesn't feel like the first issue. The first book came out, and the biggest critique I got was, this feels like issue 3. This feels like we've been doing this for a while. And my response is always, good. It doesn't, like, you don't need to know the guy's origin for it to be a fun story. I love, and I use this example all the time, Escape from New York. We know everything we need to know about Snake Plissken before we meet Snake Plissken, because people are talking about how cool that guy is. We're like, oh, we're going to send him Snake to go save the president. And then he comes in and he growls, and you're like, yeah, I get it. And it's that kind of thing that in writing, characters live and die on the page. That's a mammoth idea. But I don't believe it. Like the thing that will disinterest me so quickly in somebody's pitch for a comic or pitch for a book or anything is like, I've been working on this story for 30 years and I have all of these characters' backstories mapped out. And I'm like, I don't care about that. Is the story fun? Are these characters entertaining, and is the plot of your book interesting? I don't need to know their backstory. The backstory often, unless it directly ties to what's going on in this character's journey, isn't necessary. I think people pulled a lot of wrong ideas from Lord of the Rings, which is like, oh, now we have like Tolkien made his own language. I need to make my own language for my book. Magic systems. Who cares? That, like, oh, the magic system in the Brandon Sanderson book is so interesting. That's what you care about. Like, that's what you're interested in. And sure, they're cool. I love that. That's the other thing. Every time I say something like this, I feel like I have to like change my state that I like. If that's what you're interested in, that's cool. But that's from a writing standpoint, from a creating standpoint, I don't think it's necessary. I think it's oftentimes gets in the way of telling a good story, like a good point A to point B. We're here for X amount of pages. We don't need to know more about these characters. With the Suicide Squad movie, the first one, that movie's 45 minutes long with an hour and a half of origin story that we don't need. That movie should have started. This is my my fan edit of Suicide Squad, the first one, is when it starts in the bar. That's when they're in New York. We know what they're doing. They're saving Amanda Waller. Blah, we're going in. We're going to go save the president. That's Escape from New York. Escape from New York is an hour and 30 minutes. The perfect length for that for that movie. So they could have done cooler character building moments in the action. You could have seen people betray people. You could have, all you would have needed was another 30 minutes, and you could have had another 45 minutes, and you could have made Escape from New York with get in, oh no, double cross, oh, now we're gonna get out. But we needed to know Harley Quinn's backstory. We needed to have Jared Leto be the Joker for 3 minutes. No, I don't need it. I don't care. Oh, it's really cool. They're doing a recreation of the Alex Ross cover. Oh, cool. Who does that help? Not the story. Doesn't help the story at all. It only helps fanboys, which is what, to bring it back to the beginning of our conversation, it only helps the echo chamber of that group. So nobody cares that who made that book or who made that movie. Nobody cares who made that book. Nobody cares. Like, people were more concerned that Jared Leto was the Joker than anything else in that movie. That doesn't matter. It shouldn't matter. We stories.
Yeah, no,
tell a good story.
Yeah, I'm trying to think. That's crazy. It's funny. As soon as you said like Suicide Squad to me, like my brain instantly thought of The Losers, and that was an amazing comic book.
Well, that's a fun movie.
That's a fun movie.
It's a fun movie.
When you're like, if I rewrote Suicide Squad, I was like, oh yeah, they did. It's called The Losers. Like, it came out.
The Losers is a great movie.
10 years before and stuff like that.
Yeah. Well, that's the thing too. We just hooked up the bar that I do drink and draw at. We just hooked up a projector screen for movie nights, and we've been watching movies over there. But now, when you just walk in, there's always a movie playing. Dude, we put on Blade, the first Blade movie. And it's great. It's so fun. It's so fun. And everyone's just like sitting there. This is during the day. We're watching. Why? Why are we watching Blade during the day before drink and draw? Because Blade's great. Blade's so much fun. Blade 2, not so much. Blade 3, fun.
Whoa. Blade 2 is the first time that I saw a comic book in a movie, because that's where they like did the elongated action scene. So like the perspective was elongated when he tossed him. I was like, oh my God, that's a comic book on screen. And so I'm a huge Blade fan. Blade 3 is an abomination of the whole entire world, but that's
it's so silly.
It's it's really bad. But Ryan Reynolds did Blade, he did Deadpool, like he did the Wolverine Deadpool, he did the Green Lantern, like, so he had like 3 horrible outings, and then he does Deadpool. So like comic books, you get multiple tries to impress the audience, and some people do and some people don't. So
yeah, I mean, look at Chris Evans.
Yeah,
that guy's been in more comic book movies than anybody else.
But I still remember
everything that man does is a comic book. Scott Pilgrim, comic book. Fantastic Four, comic book. Losers, comic book. Captain America, comic book.
Snowpiercer, comic book.
Snowpiercer, comic book.
But I remember when he like came in, I was like, "That's the dude from Not Another Teen Movie."
Yeah,
and I was like, "No."
Also, comic book. That's not true.
No, it's not a comic book. But it's the perception of us. Somebody like posted out like an old newspaper clipping of like them bashing the casting of Michael Keaton as Batman. Like
Yeah, because who, like, let's be real. Who wanted Mr. Mom to be to be Batman?
But we always have this like gut reaction of like whenever there's a casting, it's bad. Like it's never good. You
Sure.
know? And like so I think our fandom, which could be a whole nother conversation, um, is has this inherent like negativity thing going on there. I don't know.
Oh yeah, that's everything. I I don't think that is only in comics. I think that's everything everywhere because it's easier to
Everything's
just
negative.
be everything's negative. It's easier to be negative than it is to be positive about something. So, um, but it takes more muscles to frown than it does to smile. Uh, it's easier to be negative about stuff because that's the stuff that people want to respond to. Because if you say
Yeah.
something negative, if you say something positive, people just go, "Yeah, well, thumbs up. I agree."
Yeah.
And then if you say something negative, people get upset and they're like, "Oh, they think they're so right about things. I'm going to prove them wrong." And so that's like just the cycle of anything in any industry. That's human nature. You say something negative about people, and they're like, "No, people like to gossip. Gossip's not positive. Gossip very rarely is positive, but people like it. It hits a little. It hits a little our lizard brain and sends dopamine out.
That
People
damn
like that.
dopamine. That damn dopamine is ruining everything.
Yeah, if we could just all be Mr. Spock, we'd have better movies. That's what I guess that's the end of this conversation and all conversations. If we could just be Spock, he was human, he had emotion, but he never showed it. That's that's the key to life.
I need to stop thinking about Winona Ryder now. So I'm
I'm
down
not.
on. She
That's
is
a weird.
she is Spock's mom in the reboot.
It is. She is also bringing it back to comic books, and there's the Joe Quinones Batman '89 comic, and Batgirl in the in the Keaton verse is it's not Winona Ryder.
Oh, really?
It is, and Joe Quinones is such a good artist and caricaturist. Like he's really good at capturing like the Michael Keaton lips, and you're like you look at it and you're like, oh, Billy D. Williams is Two-Face. Yeah, they went and made Batman 3 in a comic book.
I gotta check it out.
But they do have Batgirl, and it's not Winona.
Oh man,
Which is great.
I feel like that's now I'm like contemplating like, is that a good casting? Is it not a good casting? And I'm like, why am I even thinking?
It is the Tim Burton casting.
It's like, why am I?
So yes, it's great. Why do you care?
Yeah, no, it definitely is. Oh man, that's good. Okay, so who would Johnny Depp be in the Batman '89 universe?
Riddler.
Okay, I don't. How did you have that already like ready to go?
Because it's the only one. Who else would he be?
All right, the Rogue Gallery. Well, I mean,
have you seen Sleepy Hollow? He looks like the Riddler. That works. Put him in a top hat.
all right, I'm not gonna fight you. All right, so we're at 59 minutes, and I want to keep these to like an hour. So,
Okay.
this was good. This was a good first episode. I think we did some good stuff. I think we talked. We talked about comic books. I don't know if we got the what is comic books, but we have.
Well, let's leave on this. What is comics? Comics is is words and pictures, not necessarily in sequence.
Did you
That's
just grab
comics?
Yeah.
Because
okay.
Dennis the Menace is a comic.
It's one.
Scott McCloud is incorrect. Family Circus is a comic.
Ooh, I like that. I like that you're challenging the man on this one.
Well, it's the one thing. Scott McCloud in Understanding Comics, by his definition,
Far Side is not a comic.
The single panel comic is not a comic because it has to be in sequence.
Ooh.
And I don't think that's true.
No, I think you can make a one panel, one page comic book.
Yeah. I think, yeah.
All right. I'll see you next week.
All right. Sounds good. Ba, 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 ba.